Well, I've been hired by an agency as a designer to create some boards for a 15-second commercial. So let me tell you a little bit about this project and show you what I've been given so far. In here, I have a branding folder for a company called Ninja Gear, and they gave me this text file that's kind of just a rundown of what this company is. So the name of the company is Ninja Gear. We've got their URL, and here's the description. Ninja Gear is a store that sells all the things a ninja might use, but intended for the average person. A home chef might find a katana better suited for chopping vegetables. A carpenter might prefer a blowgun to a nail gun. A teacher might find that a flashbang or smoke grenade might get a student's attention better than simply raising her voice. And their tagline is Ninja Gear, because why should ninjas have all the fun? Sounds like a fun company. And then after that, I have the actual 15-second script. So katana is the name of the commercial, and then we have 15 seconds so we know how long this spot's going to be. So the script is a katana blade is so sharp that it can slice a bullet in half mid-flight. So yeah, we're pretty sure it can handle potatoes. Toss the chef's knife and cut your veggies in style. Ninja Gear, because why should ninjas have all the fun? So this is a 15-second pre-roll ad. So that's something that you would probably see before a video on a site like YouTube. It's just a quick little commercial that goes before the actual video. So that's the little text document. I've got some background on the company and the project, but I've also been given a storyboard. So let me open this up. It's a PDF, and I'll make it full screen so we can see it nice and clear. So this is going to be a visual with the sketches, a visual representation of the flow of the piece, the entire actions that are happening. And in here we see some bold text. This is going to be the script, what's being said in the voiceover, and then underneath it is some italics. This is the action, basically the director telling me what's going to be happening from frame to frame. So let's look at this again from the perspective of the storyboard instead of just the written script. So a katana is pulled from the sheath. Over the first line, a katana blade is so sharp, so we see the katana opening up, that it can slice a bullet in half mid-flight. So we have 4 frames going across that entire line, that it can slice a bullet in half mid-flight. And what's happening is a transition to a speeding bullet in slow motion. So that's what this little thing over in the distance probably is. And the samurai sword is now coming in, and the camera's zooming into the blade so we can get nice and close and see this bullet in slow motion impact that blade and then split in half. So there's a lot of frames there explaining exactly what's happening, but that gives me a really crystal clear idea of how that animation's going to play out. And then we transition back to real time, and the line, so yeah, we're pretty sure it can handle potatoes. So again, we have a lot of frames going across this one line, but I guess this is a potato. So we see that in frame next to the katana, and then the katana is slicing the potato. So 1, 2, 3, 4 slices until we've got a whole bunch of different slices of the potato, and they fall onto a plate. Slices fall on plate. It can handle, so we're pretty sure it can handle potatoes, and we see the text, it can handle potatoes on screen. Then we've got a katana slices through frame as transition. So the animation transition is the actual katana slicing through the frame. And the line, toss the chef's knife and cut your veggies in style. So we see a katana quickly dicing a carrot. So there we go. Instead of a chef knife, it's like a katana chopping up the carrot, and the text, cut your veggies in style. And we move on. A couple more frames just showing that carrot getting sliced up. And then we have that end tag, Ninja Gear, because why should ninjas have all the fun? So it looks like maybe their logo and then their URL. And then we have even more frames. We're not done yet. Knives thrown around logo. So looks like some butcher knife, some chef's knives get thrown into the logo. So that's probably going to happen really quickly right at the end. Okay, so that gives me a pretty decent idea of the visuals that are going to go on screen. Obviously, these are just sketches. That's why I was brought onto this project, was so that I can take these sketches and this idea and actually design the look of the piece. Pick out colors, decide how these graphics are going to look, and how they'll be interacting with each other. Now, I was also given an animatic. So this is going to be an actual video file using those sketches, but put to actual timing of the spot. So it's going to be the exact length of the commercial and probably with the voiceover. So let's just take a watch and see what this looks like.
A katana blade is so sharp that it can slice a bullet in half mid-flight. So yeah, we're pretty sure it can handle potatoes. Toss the chef's knife and cut your veggies in style. Ninja Gear, because why should ninjas have all the fun?
Great. Okay, so that's a lot of fun. That definitely puts a lot of that motion in my head, connects a lot of the dots from the script to the storyboard to actually seeing this happen in the animatic. And not only was there nice VO in there, the music was in there, and even some sound effects to really help tell the story so that nothing is left up to your imagination. Let's watch that one more time and really pay attention to the sound design.
A katana blade is so sharp that it can slice a bullet in half mid-flight. So, yeah, we're pretty sure it can handle potatoes. Toss the chef's knife and cut your veggies in style. Ninja gear. Because why should ninjas have all the fun?
Awesome. So, we've got the sheath opening up. We can hear that sound. We hear the gunshot. So we know that's a bullet. There's nothing left up to the imagination there. And then the slicing sounds of the potato, but even the slicing sounds of the carrot are really what are helping. There's only a couple of frames here, but because of that dicing sound,
Chef's knife and cut your veggies in style.
You can kind of fill in those gaps where there aren't any frames sketched in. You know that that's going to be happening really quickly. So, okay, that gives me a really great picture of the timing of the entire piece and how it's going to flow, the vibe of the piece with that voiceover and the music. It's kind of playful. It's not really taking itself seriously. So that helps me a little bit in terms of what direction I should be taking the visuals. And if we go back to my assets folder, we even have a little bit more in here. So under the branding folder, we have the Ninja Gear end card Illustrator file. So this looks like that must be their logo with the URL. So one of these frames is already pretty much done for me. Right here, this frame right here has that exact same lockup. So that's what we're going to see on that frame. So it's just up to me to pick some colors for this and however else it's going to be styled. All right, what else do we have? We have an images folder, and in here is a renders folder. Now, this was explained to me that this slow motion section right here with the bullet being sliced in half, they don't have footage of that, and that'd be pretty hard to actually do. So they are actually going to have the animator animate this in 3D. So they have a 3D katana and a 3D bullet that they are going to simulate this slow motion chop on their end. So I don't have to worry about exactly how that's going to be created. They gave me 3 different renders of this one shot. So there's the blade with the bullet splitting off of it. And they gave me 3 different angles, so I get to choose which one I think is going to fit best, but they're going to handle the actual asset creation for that section. It's just up to me, again, to pick out colors, what's going to happen in the background, what is the styling of this element going to look like. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be responsible for deciding. All right, so I've got those. I also have a stock folder. So let me open up all these at once and take a look. Looks like we have a bunch of potatoes with slices and whole potatoes, and it even looks like those are all from the same series of photos, like the same photo shoot, which is great because that means they were all shot under the same light, and I can interchange any of these elements and the lighting will be consistent, so it will look like they're part of the same element. I've got some people holding samurai swords. This one's a little interesting. It's a guy in a business suit. I seriously doubt they're expecting to see something like that. And considering that in the storyboard we never see any people, I doubt that I'm going to be showing full body shots. Maybe I just cut out the katana. We'll see what happens. But I also have some shots like this one. Nice, depth of field coming out with that blade pointed towards the camera. A couple different options there. So that's great. I have some chef's knives that I'm going to be using for the end there, a cutting board, a carrot and some carrot slices, a plate, and then we have these which kind of just look like solid tan color right now, but if I click on one of them, you can see it's actually paper texture. So these were given to me just as a textural element that I can play around with. Maybe I want to use them in the design. They were just given to me. So it's going to be up to me again to decide how I want to incorporate these. That's what they want me to do. They want me to come up with the visual aesthetic for the piece. Those are going to help a lot though, so I've got all of that accessible, and that's all I've been given. I don't have any visual direction. The company hasn't given me any kind of guidance as to how they want this piece to look. They want me to be the designer, to come up with the look and decide what this should feel like. So that's my responsibility. That's what I'm going to do. One thing I want to talk about is how there are, 25 frames in this storyboard, but that doesn't mean I'm going to design 25 boards. And the reason for that is because a lot of these are very transitional elements and they don't need unique assets for every single shot. Specifically, like this slow-mo shot of the katana going through the bullet. They told me they're going to be doing that in 3D. So my responsibility is just taking the render, which was for this frame, and then treating it however I think it needs to be treated to fit the rest of the piece. So I'm going to take this one element, put it into a background, whatever that background is, maybe add some graphical elements to it, and then that will be the one frame for this little sequence of the slow-mo bullet going into the blade. They can reuse whatever I put on that one shot and apply it to the rest of that sequence. Same thing for this potato being sliced a whole bunch of times. I don't need to do every single one of these frames. I just need to give them a potato that they can easily slice up into a bunch of pieces, or that is already designed so that it will be able to be separated so they don't have to do any of that work. And then just give them one of these sample frames. So maybe this one right here of the katana moving through the potato and it floating in the air there. So I'm going to choose a select number of frames and design boards for those specifically, making sure that I cover all of my bases and that I'm giving the animators enough assets to work with to complete this entire animation. Another thing I want to think about is the transitions, because some of the transitions have been laid out in the storyboard very clearly, like this one right here, the katana slicing through the frame. Sometimes transitions are not laid out in storyboards, and it's up to me to have a discussion with the animator or the director to talk about what that transition might look like. If they want me to put thought into the motion and decide how that transition should look, or sometimes the animator doesn't want to see anything designed for that. They want to be the one who designs the transition, so they would prefer that I just design frame A and frame C and let them come up with what frame B looks like. In this case, since it was already designed, that tells me that the animator probably had some input and they want the transition to look like this, so maybe, yeah, that would be a good transition for me to mock up in a board. But that's definitely something that is on a per project basis. It's always a conversation that I want to have with the animator or at least the creative director to see whether or not I should be putting effort into designing transitions. Because if I do design transitions and then the animator decides, you know what, no, I want to design my own and have it look the way that I want it to look, then I'm wasting time. Okay, so I'm going to start by picking out the frames that I think I want to design. I'm thinking obviously the first frame needs to be in there, so the katana in its sheath, and then the second frame is it opening up. Now that's going to be pretty easy to do. It's not going to be very time consuming, and the only difference is from here to here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do both of those frames. And then we have this transitional sequence of the bullet in slow motion. And since all that's going to be done in 3D, I probably don't need to do most of this. In fact, I probably will only do the frame that they gave me the 3D element for. Otherwise, all of these other shots aren't going to look right because I don't have any more renders of that 3D model. So this is the one that I will do with that bullet being sliced in half. Then we transition into the potato. And I don't want to do just a potato and the katana. That's not very exciting. So maybe I'll do this frame right here where it's already sliced twice. We see a couple of those slices flying off the potato. And then we have the slices falling onto the plate. And this is probably an important frame because it is the first time that we see text on screen. So I'll definitely do that one so I can decide how this type is going to be laid out, what it's going to look like, what font to use, and then I'll show those potato slices on a plate. Then we have this transitional element. I'll probably do that one as well since this is very deliberate in the storyboard. So I'll have the blade cutting through this previous frame. The text is missing on this one, but I doubt they meant to do that. That's probably supposed to be under the plate still. And then we have cut your veggies in style. So I'll probably do one of these frames with the carrot getting sliced by the katana and the next block of text. So that's designed and laid out so that the animator doesn't have to think about how that type should be put in there. That's something that I'll take care of. Then we have the final logo lockup, which is again something they gave me, so I'll definitely do that one and just put some background into it, whatever that ends up being. And then we have these frames of the knives throwing. So I'll probably pick one of them, maybe this one right here where two of the knives are already in and one is flying in. So let's count that up. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 frames total probably is what I'll end up doing. So now that I've decided that, I'm going to just jump straight into Photoshop and start building this. Now, the reason why I'm starting in Photoshop is because I have a lot of stock photos of actual physical elements that are going to need to be cut out. And obviously, I want to be working in Photoshop with that, not in Illustrator. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to need Illustrator. I'm probably going to want to use some vector elements. But working with a lot of photos in Illustrator isn't the best way to go. It's not a very fun process. It's not easy to transfer from Illustrator back to Photoshop if I need to. So I'm going to build everything in Photoshop. So I'm going to start with the 1920 by 1080 preset and go into my advanced options, make sure that this is set to sRGB. And my background contents, I'm going to turn to transparent. And I want to make sure that I have artboards. And I can't put in a specific number at this point, so I'm just going to leave it like that. But everything else should be great. I'll click Create. And there we go. I've got my first artboard, and from there I can add more. And before I do anything, I'm just going to save this PSD. And I can't even save it right now by pressing Command S because there's nothing in it. But if I come up to File, Save As, then I can save it. So I'm going to put it in my Assets folder, and I'm going to make a new folder called Boards. And I'll name this Ninja Gear Katana Boards. And actually inside of that boards folder, I'm going to make another folder called PSD. So I know these are my Photoshop documents. That way you can put other folders in there, like an output folder where I'm exporting the actual JPEG versions of the boards. But this way my PSDs are nice and organized. This is something that's very important to do. Not only inside of your PSDs, keeping everything named and organized, but also in your folder structure so it all makes sense and is easy to find and navigate. I'll click Save, hit OK, and I'm ready to go. That's saved, and anything I do in here is now in the right place. Let's take a look at that storyboard again. We've got those 2 first frames of the katana opening up from the sheath. And then let's take a look at the stock that I have access to. So let's see. Probably would make the most sense to use these photos because you see, well, for one, the actual katana coming out of the sheath in this photo, but also right here, I have the entire samurai sword as well as the entire sheath. So I can probably cut some of these elements up and use them together. You know, obviously I'm not sure if the animator is going to need the entire length of the blade, but because I have it, I should probably prepare that in this Photoshop asset just in case they need it. That's just kind of me thinking ahead so that once the animator goes to animate it, they're not stuck with just this length of the blade. If they want to pull it all the way out of the sheath, they can if I use this. So I'm probably going to have to combine a few of these. The sheath is also cut off from here, so if I wanted to pull it any further closer together, then I'm going to need probably this photo right here to get the rest of it. So let's start there. I'm going to start cutting these out. Again, I'm going to be speeding through some of this, time-lapsing it, because a lot of it is very repetitive. You've already seen me cutting things out. You've done it yourself. So I'm not going to make you sit through and watch me do things that you already know how to do. Anything that is new, though, don't worry. I will explain, and you won't be missing anything. I'm having a little bit of a hard time telling where the edge of the blade is because it's so dark and it's blending in with the background. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer, go to my adjustments, but I don't want to just click on one of these with my path selected, or else it's going to add that path to the adjustment layer. So I first want to deselect my path by going to the Paths panel. If you don't have that, go up to Window, Paths. And this is my work path. That's what Photoshop calls the path that I'm working on. It's not been applied to anything yet. It's just sitting there. So I want to deselect that by clicking off of it, then add my adjustment layer, and then brighten up my image. And that makes it much easier to see the edge of the blade there. So now that that's ready to go, I'm going to grab my work path again. There it is, and I'm just going to keep outlining this. All right, so as I'm cutting this out and getting to the hand, I'm realizing that I included the hand on the handle of the blade there. So I did that kind of unconsciously, or subconsciously rather, but thinking about it now, it would be really, really difficult to try and get an isolated version of that hilt without the hand there. So I'm thinking about how could I treat these assets, and because this is kind of a playful brand, they're not taking themselves very seriously, and it's ninja themed, I'm thinking that I can be a little bit more crude with the design, and maybe crude is the wrong word, but maybe just not quite so perfect. I don't have to worry about perfection, and maybe have a little bit more fun. So I'm thinking I'll keep the hands attached to the katana and to any other elements that involve the hands, but cut them off from the arm and the rest of the body. That way you don't have to worry about the models that are holding it. The guy in the business suit, you won't ever see his suit because I'm just going to use his hand. And they'll kind of just be like these disembodied hands holding the katanas. I think that could be fun. It's playful. I think that goes with the brand, and it could be a really interesting look. So that's how I'm going to proceed, and we'll see how it goes. So that's why I'm cutting out the hands with the blade. And it's kind of up to me to decide where to cut off the hand. I think I'm going to follow kind of this fleshy part of your wrist, cutting everything off below this section right here, and see how that looks. All right, so there we go. I've got my first completed path, and I'm sure you noticed I have tons of points. The reason for this is because this photo is really high resolution. There are a lot of little details in the ribbon that's going around this handle. And since I'm being hired to do this work, I want to make sure I do it as professionally as possible. Obviously, I want to give the animators high quality cutouts of these photos. I don't want to leave out any little details. I could have simplified this probably with one point on either side or either end of this handle. But like I said, I want to go the extra mile, give them all of the details of the photo so it's super clean and looks really great. All right, now that that's done, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to add that path as a layer mask, or a vector mask. So I'll delete the layer mask. I can turn off my curves layer, turn off the background, and there we go. We've got my isolated hand holding the katana. So I'm going to rename this katana, and then turn my background layer back on, and now cut out the sheath. All right, I just noticed something. I was drawing this path on the same layer. So that honestly doesn't matter. It's just going to reveal that portion of that layer, and I can separate them after the fact. So I'm just going to keep going. All right, there are my two hands holding the katana and the sheath. So I'm just going to duplicate this layer, call it sheath, and then get rid of the path that's over the katana on this layer, and get rid of the path that's over the sheath on this layer. So I have two separate layers now. You can get rid of that curves and make sure to save this. So for every stock photo that I cut out, I'm just going to save it as a PSD so I can fall back to it for those sorts paths, but otherwise I'll just be pulling the layers into other documents. So I'm going to call this Katana Sheath 01, and I'm going to put this under my boards PSD folder, but within this, I'm just going to call, or make a new folder and call it source, so that I know these are not necessarily the final assets that'll be handed off to the animator, but they are they're instead the source PSDs that have the cutouts within them that I can always go back to. So I'm going to duplicate things out of these PSDs. So I'll save that and then move on to the next photo. So what I'm going to need to do next is probably cut this one out. Now actually, let me open up that PSD real quick one more time. The reason why I need to cut this one out, and the reason why I like this photo, is because it's in the pose that was in the storyboard. So the lighting's gonna be right on this one. The hands are good, they're in the right position, and they're in the right orientation. If I were to take this, this layer and rotate it around so that it's oriented in the same way, and actually I just rotated the path. There we go. If I rotate both of these layers so that they're in the same orientation as what was in the other photo, then I'm going to get one hand upside down, and that's not the way that I want it to look. It's not very natural. Instead, I want to see those two hands in the same orientation like this, not one upside down. On top of that, because I rotated them, the lighting is completely different. It just doesn't match up well. So I think I'm going to be merging some of these elements from this document with some of the elements from this document. So I want to preserve the hands in this one and probably extend out the sheath, and then maybe replace this blade with the blade from the other document. I might have done a little extra work than I needed to by cutting out those hands, but like I said, I want to go the extra mile and make sure that I give the animator every single little detail that I can. I don't want to under-deliver by any means. So I'm going to continue cutting this out and then start putting some things together. Another little tip is if you're running into issues where your path might be overlapping into what is in the background, like the model, just give yourself a little bit of a contraction on your path. Don't worry about cutting a little bit of your subject out, which in this case is the blade, because you don't want to see any of those pixels of the background. So just err on the side of cutting a little bit off rather than keeping a little bit of the background in. Okay, now that I've cut out both of these, I'm going to open up the other one as well. I'm going to duplicate all 3 layers into my Ninja Gear boards comp. So I'm just going to select both of these, press Command C to copy, and then paste into my artboard. And those are nice and big, obviously. Then I'm going to grab this layer as well, copy, paste, and then I want to convert each one of these into a smart object. So convert to smart object, convert to smart object. And actually this one needs a name. I'm going to call this one Katana 2, convert that to a smart object, and now I can scale all of them down without losing any kind of resolution and start to frame this up. So let's zoom in nice and close so we can see what's going on. And this is probably about how far apart I want the hands to be pulling the katana out of the sheath in the second frame. Remember, the first frame is it closed up, and then the second one is it coming apart. So maybe I'll need to scale this one up just a little bit so that the handle and the sheath are both off the screen a little, and then the hands are kind of centered there on either side. Now I want to make some guides for my artboard, so I'm going to switch to my rulers by pressing Command R and then drag out until it lines up right there, snaps to the center of my artboard, and let go. Then I'll do the same thing right here. Now these are showing up as blue because they're artboard guides and not canvas guides. So that means if I deselect my artboard, it's going to go away. But anytime I have that selected in here, they're going to show up. And the benefit to that is they're not going to cross over into another artboard as I start to work on another artboard. Now that I have that lined up, I'm going to grab these hands and kind of just make sure they are nice and centered up there. I think that's going to work out. And then I'm going to take these two and scale them at the same time. The reason I want to do this at the same time is because I know these two elements are in relationship to each other the same scale because they were shot in the same photo on the same plane. This one was not. It's from a different shot, so I want to keep that a little bit separate. So I'm just going to rotate this so it matches the blade a little bit more closely and move my anchor point so I can rotate it from right there. But there we go. Now it's lining up the blade, and I can grab both of these and transform them at the same time. And now I just basically want to match up the size of this hand to the size of this hand. And I can use the katana itself as a reference for that as well. Looks like something around there is probably, I'm looking at the, whatever this part here is called, the protector on top of the handle. I'm lining that length up with this length. I'm going to put the top length right about there. Again, grab my anchor point, which is right here, and move it to that top point, and then scale from that point by starting to drag and then holding down Option and Shift to scale proportionally from that anchor point. So I want to make it right about that size. So this also lines up. And clearly something's off. That reference point isn't working. Look at the size of these hands compared to the ones in the foreground. So there's actually a pretty good chance what this means is that the photographer had multiple swords that were different lengths and different sizes. So instead of using that as my reference point, I'm instead going to use the hand and kind of just eyeball that until it looks about the same size. So roughly that size, I'd say. All right, so with that in place, I'll hit Enter to apply the transformation, and now I can move these layers around freely, but they're pretty much lined up at this point. Now, what were the parts of these two layers that I needed? Well, I need probably this blade because I have the entire length of the blade compared to this photo where it's cut off right here. And then I need the sheath from this layer right here because the sheath is cut off in this layer. So just so I have a little bit more room to work, now that they're all the same scale, I'm going to just scale them all down so I can see everything. And once I'm done, I'll put them back up to the right size for that frame. But basically what I want to do is try and line this one up, this sheath layer up, so that it's just an extension of the sheath down here. So something like this, lining up this end, keeping in mind that this probably is a different sword since that does not line up with this. So I might have to cheat it a little bit, but obviously I don't want to see any of the hand from this layer right here. So I'm probably just going to preserve this portion of the sheath from this photo and mask off everything up to maybe the ribbon. That might be a good spot to end it, so that I'm replacing the ribbon on this shot, but I'm preserving everything from the ribbon down on this shot. So why don't we just start there? I'm going to cut this out nice and cleanly so that it follows that ribbon and takes away everything on the left side of it. So just that much. Close off the path, and then I want to make sure that's set to subtract front shape and then add a vector path mask. There we go. Now I've cut that off, and the lighting is slightly different, but without context that really doesn't look too bad. And I think I'm going to be brightening up this hand anyway, since it is so much darker than this one over here. So don't worry about the lighting quite yet. But now what I need to do is take this layer right here underneath and cut off everything from basically the midpoint of this ribbon down. So let me add a path there and off to the side. Close that off again, making sure that's set to subtract, and mask it off. And now underneath there is no other sheath, and all that's left is figuring out how to handle the part of the ribbon that's overlapping the hand. So what I might do is take this little bit of the ribbon right here off of this layer. Let me do that. And I'm just going to grab a bunch of these points actually and delete them, and then reconnect this in this direction. So I'm cutting off this part that's tied off on the end. And then I'm going to basically just try and seamlessly line this part of the ribbon up with this part, playing with the lighting to get that looking right. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. All right, so I have my sheath extension, but now I need to separate the actual sheath and hand from this photo from the rest of the blade. So I want to pretty much just add another path onto this vector mask. By just selecting it and then starting to draw another path. I just want to cut off this side of the image as well. There we go, and make sure that's nice and clean in there. Lines right up with the sheath. There we go. So now we have just the hand on the sheath and then the rest of the sheath there. So those two go together. Then I'm just going to duplicate that layer one more time. I'll rename this sheath plus hand, and then this will be the hilt plus hand. And on this layer, I'll just get rid of the masks that are already on it. What I want is everything up until the blade, basically, because I'm going to take the entire blade from this sword and put it onto this one. So everything in here is going to be removed. So I'm just going to grab my pen tool and be very precise about where this gets disconnected, right about there, and then cut everything but the hand out. Now this is removing the hand because my path is set to subtract, so all I have to do is grab here and say combine instead of subtract. There we go. Now I've got just the hilt and the hand, I've got the sheath and the hand holding the sheath, and now I just need to take the blade off of this layer and put it in right there. So let me cut that out at the same spot right here, and this time I want to keep all of this blade. All right, now that that's set, I'll add the mask, delete the layer mask, and there's my blade. Now, another reason why I think it's pretty likely that this photographer had multiple lengths of swords is because a lot of times you can get katanas in multiple lengths. There's, really short ones, there's super long ones, so they probably just switched the prop to serve the photo a little bit better. So I might end up scaling this up just a little bit so it doesn't look quite so thin. And so that it lines up with the sheath a little better. So I guess first things first, I'm going to put the blade right where it goes. and it looks like it's curving up a little bit to me, so I'm going to move my anchor point here and transform that around there so that it lines up a little bit more straight. There we go, something like that. Get it nice and precise there. And I'll rename this blade. So that goes there. And then let's just move everything over so we can get a good look at it. And these two really should be grouped so that I don't move one independently from the other. That still happened when I grabbed it because I have auto select layer on, but if I change this to auto select group, then when I click on this, it's going to move the group as a whole. So I'm basically just seeing if this sheath is the same length as the blade. It looks a little bit longer than the blade, so I'm just going to move it up like that, and then I'll take that blade and scale it up so that it matches a little bit more closely. So again, moving my anchor point, holding down Option and Shift to scale from that point, and then just making the blade a little bit bigger. Cheating it a little bit, but nobody is ever going to know. Then I can line this up, and there we go. We've got my, actually this would probably move all the way up to here. And you know what? I'm going to do a little bit of research real quick to make sure I get this right. So let's open up Google Images and just search for katana in sheath. And yeah, it looks like that would go all the way up to the little protector there. So this really needs to butt right up against there, and then the blade should be sized to the sheath. So I'm going to move that, that sheath up a little bit one more time, grab that blade, and scale it down just a little bit. Something like that. All right, now that those proportions are set, I can put these together, make sure that's nice and aligned, and then move all of this together, scale it up a little even. Because everything's smart objects, this is totally non-destructive, and because I'm using vector paths, I can really scale this as much as I want. So I'm probably going to want to line that center point up right about there, right on that protector, and then just scale it up nice and big, something like this. Maybe that's a little bit extreme. We can scale that down just a little bit. Something like that. And that might be a good starting point for this first frame with those two together. Now, obviously the lighting on this side is not working. It does not look very convincing. So I think I'm going to go ahead and add a curves adjustment to this directly. Command M is curves shortcut. And I'm just going to increase the brightness. Now, I'm not going to be able to match this exactly to the left hand, but I'm going to do my best. Remember, I'm not worried about perfection here because of the style that I think I can go with. Can be a little bit more crude, but I'm also pretty sure I'll be stylizing these photos quite a bit, so it'll hide some of the imperfection. So I'm just going to get it about right, something like that, and click OK. And then I want to just take a look at this ribbon and see if I can do anything to line it up a little bit more nicely. So maybe just drop it down 1 or 2 pixels, something like that. And it looks like I've got a little gap here that I might have missed. Yep, there's a little white part of the background that I need to cut out of this layer. So I'm actually going to go into the Smart Object for this one. Find that spot. There it is, hiding on me. And then cut that out. So let me zoom in nice and close. I'm on the path, so now that I start drawing another path, it's going to be contained in that same mask. Cut out that hole, and then make sure to switch that to subtract. And there we go. Now there's an actual hole there. I'll save the smart object, go back into my main document, there it is. And then to make this ribbon look just a little bit more seamless, I think what I'll do is just feather the mask just a little bit. That way I can go into where the actual sheath from this photo was, and it'll kind of just fade into that shot a little bit more cleanly. Can also make sure that my paths are super precise here, because this is something that I want to look pretty seamless. But there we go, something like that. Then I'll grab that path in my properties panel, go to the masks, and then turn up my feather. Not a lot. I don't want to make it look like this. You know, just maybe 1 pixel or even a little bit less than a pixel. And now that just fits in there a little bit more naturally. All right, so this is going to probably be the first element that is ready to go for the animator. I've given them the hand on the sheath. I've given them the hilt and the hand and the blade, which I will put together. So we'll call this the katana group, and we'll call this the sheath group. And now I could move this katana out this direction. I could move the sheath out this direction independently, which allows the animator to move it from this point to this point, animating it very easily. And just to make this even a little bit cleaner, I'm going to convert these to smart objects one more time so that they're individual layers. I don't need access to those 2 layers within each one of these smart objects. So I'm just going to leave it like that and then align this up where I want it in the frame, somewhere like that. And I'm off to the races. That was actually a decent amount of work, but I'm pleased with the result. I think it's working out really well, and I can continue working on the rest of my boards. So this first shot in the storyboard, that's what we're going to see, is these 2 hands holding the sheath and the katana blade. And then to the next frame, we're going to show it opening up. Since this is really easy for me to do, I'm going to go ahead and add that second board in there. So I need to go to my artboard tool, select my artboard, and then click on the plus icon to the right. So if I do that, it's going to add a second artboard, and I can now duplicate these layers over into this artboard. So let's go to artboard 1, and there's still an empty layer in the background that I never used, so I'll delete that. Grab both of these layers and then hold Option and drag them up to artboard 2. And that duplicates the layers, and you see that it automatically aligns them to that artboard in the same positioning as what we had on the first artboard. So that's a really easy way to transfer layers over. Now that I have that, I'm going to just shift this hand over this way, shift this hand over this way, and maybe rotate it just a little bit around this section so that it looks like that blade is coming out. Since it is curved, those hands would probably naturally bend a little bit. So let me do the same thing on this layer. Bend that out just a little bit. And you know what? I think I'm going to pull this hand out even further. So these hands are really pushed out to the sides of the frame now. And I think this blade looks a little bit dark. So I'm going to go into the Katana Smart Object and then select my blade and add a curves adjustment and just brighten it up. I want to really make that nice and bright. Something like that, probably. Click OK and turn that off and back on. There we go, just a little boost there. Save that, and because this smart object is used in both documents, it's been updated in both places. So this entire time while I'm cutting out these photos, I've just been thinking about how I want this entire piece to look. And I don't want to do everything photo-based. I want to use some 2D vector elements as well. And this entire style in my head, for whatever reason, is very vibrant. It's bright and playful. So I think I'm going to start by just sticking a solid color in the background, a nice bright color, and see what happens. So I'm going to just add a new solid color right here. And then, I don't know, just make something bright green and then put it in the background so I can see it in the context of this board. I need to pick something that fits the black and the red. I could change the color of the red, but I like that. I think it's nice. The black, gold, red color combo is working well. So why don't we just play around with the hue and try and find something that fits that red. So maybe something in the yellows. I'm really just doing this arbitrarily. I mean, I'm just sliding this around to see what colors work well with the photo. Maybe something nice and bright yellow. Like I said, I want it to pop. I want it to be vibrant. But I want to make sure I don't go too far into the greens. I definitely don't want to go orange. But somewhere right in here in that yellow is kind of like a sweet spot, I think. Maybe something like that. We'll start there. And I'm probably going to be adding other 2D elements in here as well. At this point, I'm just kind of focusing on cutting out the photos and making the basic compositions, and then I'll probably come back and add in some other elements. One thing that is bothering me about this frame is this empty gap on the left side. Since the sheath is going off on that side, I think I want to make these just scaled up a little bit from this being my center point. Let me bring up my guides. That's the center point that I want to scale from. Scale that up even just enough to where like the end of that is touching. So it goes off the side a little bit, and then it looks like it's a little off rotation. It's right about there. That's nice and straight up and down, and now that fills the entire width of the frame. And I think I like that better. Another really handy trick in Photoshop, if you want to get rid of all of your interface, just press Tab on the keyboard. That gets rid of your panels. And then press F once and F one more time, and that gets rid of everything else. So I can really just zoom in here and focus on my actual document without any of the distractions of the interface. All right, I like the way that that's looking. I might need to clean up some of these paths a little bit, but I'll worry about that later. I'll hit Tab one more time to bring back my panels, and F to get out of full screen. And then I'm just going to copy this color fill over to the other artboard. There we go. And I think that's a pretty decent start on those first 2 frames. Very bright and vibrant. Obviously, I can adjust these colors later on, but I think this is the start of the feel for the entire piece. Okay, I'm going to move to my next artboard. Click on artboard 2, and that gives me the option to add another one on either side of this. Just add one over here. And the next frame I was going to do was the bullet split right here. So this is going to involve the 3D render. I don't have to cut anything out for this. I'm going to come up to File, Place Embedded, and then find those renders. All right, so I have 3 options. Let's take a look at each one of them. The first one is from a little bit further out. Second one is from a higher angle. And then the third one is nice and close. I think I want to go with this one because you can see the most detail in the bullet that way. And these were all designed at 1920 by 1080. That's what they were exported as. So I don't have the ability to scale this up without losing resolution. Obviously, the animator can position the camera however he wants, and resolution isn't an issue with 3D models. But just to keep my board looking as clean as possible, I think I'm going to go with that real nice and close version. So I'm going to grab that third one. And there we go, it's sized perfectly. Press enter, and my composition is already beginning to work itself out because that's how it's laid out, and that looks pretty dead on to what was in the storyboard. So maybe I want to move it over just a little bit. I think I want to do a rule of thirds guide on this just to help me line some things up. So I'm going to go up to View, New Guide Layout. And I want to make sure that this is on my selected artboard, so it's only going to generate them on this one. 3 columns, 3 rows. Click OK, and there's my rule of thirds. So maybe I'll bring this down just a little bit so that bullet split is right on that thirds guide. Then I'm going to bring out another ruler, and hopefully this will snap to the center of my artboard. It's not, so let me undo that. Grab the artboard so I can see the transform controls for it, and then, there we go, snap that out to the center. All right, now I have my guide set up. I basically just want to have that point of impact right about the center of the frame, but lining up on that thirds guide. So there we go, simple as that. Now I'm thinking this should be a pretty dramatic change in color for the background because it's this super slow motion, so I'm thinking the color of the background shifts as it goes into slow motion and we get super close into the blade. So let me copy this color fill over and then maybe change it from a yellow hue to a red hue, because red is much more intense, right? So maybe not quite that bright. It's really hard to look at. I don't want to give any kind of eye strain, but just dim that down a little bit, and then I don't want it pure red, maybe just a little bit of orange. Not this much. I don't want it to look like Halloween, but just something a little bit off that pure red hue, like that. I think those 2 colors work pretty well together, and like I said, I can always come back and adjust colors, but I think that nice bright red background makes this shot much more intense. So I like the way that looks. I'm going to keep it as it is for now. And I've already gotten 3 of my board's compositions pretty much figured out. Let's take a look at the storyboard again, and I think the next shot I was going to do was one of these here with the katana slicing through the potato. So it doesn't really matter which one of these I do. I just need to make sure that I get a potato ready to go to be sliced up and that I have a katana moving through the air. So let me add another artboard. I think I can just click on this artboard. Yep, actually I'll go down to this one. I'll do 3, since I'm doing 9 boards total, I'll do 3 rows, 3 columns. So artboard 4, I'll close everything else up and make sure that artboard 4 is at the top. There we go, and I can get to work. So on this board, I need to get a potato and another katana. So let me look at my stock photos and see what I have access to. So obviously potatoes up here, and then some katanas. Now, this particular shot was the katana going through the air, so I don't think I'm going to need the perspective of either of one of these. I've already used this one, so it's probably going to be left to one of these 2. So I've got a hand, one hand on one katana and then 2 hands on the other. So why don't I cut both of those out? I'm probably going to need to give both of those to the animator anyway, and then I can decide which one I want to use for this shot, but I'll just start there. So let me grab that and open it up in Photoshop. Okay, there I have the two katanas cut out, and I can start working them into my board. So I'm going to copy both of these. Actually, I'll rename it first. Katana plus hands 1. Katana plus hands 2. All right, select both of those layers and copy, and then paste them into this artboard. There we go, and make sure that I convert them to smart objects right away and save this document. Make sure that you're always saving your document. Never lose any of your progress that way in case something crashes. Just make sure it's always saved. Command S all the time. All right, so there's my two katanas. I don't need both of them within this particular board. Let's just take a look. I'm thinking I want to do a frame like this one. Probably work on the composition a little bit. The sketches, obviously, they're just rough. The compositions within these frames with these hand-drawn sketches is not set in stone. That's something that I'm responsible for cleaning up and making a nice composition. So I think I'm going to take one of the katanas that's going in that direction. I kind of like the one with the two hands, I think. It looks more like they were intentionally trying to do something with the katana. For whatever reason, that's just how I'm seeing it. So I'm going to turn off the other one for now, and then maybe just place this somewhere around here in the frame. Now I got to pick a color for the background. I'm not exactly sure what color I want yet, but I'm just going to move one of these in here just so I have something in the background to look at. And then, I don't know, we've got the yellows to the reds. Maybe after red we'll change the color from something from yellow to something different. So let's just try and pick a different color. Not red, obviously, because we were just on red. Maybe something in this green area. Maybe a little bit more blue than yellow, so it's more different than these first couple of frames. Thing around here, maybe. Yeah, we'll try that. So there we go. I've got the start of my color palette here, yellow, red, and blue, green. I think they're all very similar. They're feeling like they're part of the same color palette. And then we've got these hands. So I need to find a composition where the potato's probably on this side, as if it had just sliced through it, and maybe I'll have a couple of slices flying in there. So I need to pick out a picture of one of the potatoes and cut that out. So what do we have here? I think they're pretty much all grouped together, but let me again just bring them all up. And yeah, they're all, the first 4 photos are my potatoes. So let's start with this one. This is the whole potato, and then I have some potato slices. So let's grab this one and cut that out. Now, so far, everything that I've been doing to mask has been using vector paths, but in the case of this potato, it has enough contrast with the rest of the image, and it doesn't have all these tiny little details. It's just smooth edges that I think I can use some of my selection tools and just do a layer mask instead. So I'm going to switch to my quick selection tool, make sure my brush is a little bit bigger, and then just kind of paint on, and there we go, snaps right onto the potato almost perfectly. From there, I just need to make sure I get rid of some of this background potato that's kind of blending in there. Take a look at that with my quick mask cue on the keyboard, and then make sure I'm not getting anything else down here that isn't supposed to be in it. But this is a lot quicker than fitting, super precise vector paths on there. All right, now that I have my basic selection, I'm just going to go into select and mask and make sure that it's nice and clean. So I'm going to smooth it out just a little bit. And then I think I'll just shift the edge in a little bit, not a ton, just enough to get rid of anything that's kind of hanging off the edges there. But that looks pretty good. Let me switch to like a black background. There we go. Turn the opacity up. And it looks like this could use a little bit of help. So I'm just going to brush in a little bit right here, just to make that a little bit cleaner. There we go. We've got a good selection there. And now I'm just going to output that to a layer mask. Click OK, and I've got my potato. I'm going to call this whole potato. And I'll save this as whole potato. Put that into my board's PSD source folder. And then copy that over to my main document right here and paste it in, convert it to a smart object. There's my whole potato. So that's going to go somewhere around here. maybe about that big. And then what I need is to artificially slice this up. Now, I can't just, take my lasso tool and make something like this, mask it off, duplicate it, and then invert my mask because, the bottom portion might look fine, but I would see a section of the potato right about here where you can see the inside of it. So I need to artificially recreate that, hopefully from the other stock photos that I have access to. So let's take a look at those real quick. I've got this grouping of slices, which I can't really do much with these since they're all covering each other up. I don't have the entire slice. So basically, I'm just going to look at this one slice on top and cut that out. And then I have, I think, an alternate right here where I could take this one as another whole slice, and then one final one with an alternate angle. So I'm basically going to take the top slice from each one of these photos to use as individual slices that I'm recreating artificially inside of this board. So let's start with those. I'll grab each one of those and actually just open all of them up at once. So drag them down to the Photoshop icon. That'll open each one its own file, and I'll just start cutting these out. Now I'm using the lasso tool here because I started making selections in Photoshop with the lasso tool, so I got a lot of practice with it. Pretty much everyone I know since learning how to make selections this way thinks I'm crazy for using the lasso tool, so do not think that this is necessarily the best way. I'm just pretty quick at it. That's why I'm doing it this way. You could use any of the selection tools to add or subtract from your selection. I just find it quick and easy to be able to freehand and follow the contour of images with the lasso tool like that. And I almost always at least, go back into the select and mask, smooth it out a little bit, maybe add some contrast, and again, shift that edge back. Okay, I have all of the slices cut out now. I'm not really worried about preserving this as a PSD, at least not for each individual slice. So instead what I'm going to do is just copy this layer and paste it into this document. And then I'm going to grab this layer, copy it, and paste it in the same document. Then I can just close these. I don't need to save them. They're super easy selections, and now I have them all in one document. So I'll call this document probably sliced potato. Again, putting that in the source PSD. That way everything's backed up into one document and I don't have to have all these crazy PSDs for things that actually go together. But now we can see that all three of these slices really do look like they came from the same potato because they're all shot in the same light, the same environment. So those are going to work well. I don't think this third one is necessarily going to line up as well as these two do, but that's okay. I don't have to have them all exactly on top of each other. I'm just going to crop this in, and you can do this quickly by making a marquee selection or any selection and then just coming up to image crop. So you don't have to use the crop tool to crop. That's a quick way to do it. So I'm going to call this potato slice 1, 2, and 3, and then save this document, copy those 3 layers and paste them into this document. Again, making sure to convert them to smart objects. That should be the first thing you do every time you bring one of those layers into your main document, because that way you don't have to worry about scaling and resolution. So I'll just scale this down to be about the same size as the potato, roughly. It doesn't have to be exact, but something about that width is probably about right. Can move those around. And I'm going to go ahead and put these into a group and call it potato, just so I can keep my layers nice and organized. We're going to have a lot of layers, a lot of groups inside of these artboards, so I want to stay organized as much as I possibly can. And now that I have these slices and this potato, I can kind of put a couple of them together to hopefully make a convincing looking sliced potato with the contents exposed. So let's start by just basically splitting this layer in two and separating the top from the bottom half. So I'll just grab my pen tool, so this is nice and clean path, something like that, and maybe curve it up just a little bit more. So around there, and then section off the top portion of this layer. Delete the vector or the layer mask, just keep the vector mask and make that combine. So there's the top of my potato. Duplicate the layer, and then I could actually just invert the mask. There we go. So now I've got the potato bottom. and I can split these two apart now. So the bottom portion is fine basically the way it is, and the top portion is what I need to fill in with the potato slice. So I think I'm going to base it off of this slice right here. So I want to first change the orientation so that it's at the same angle as what we would be seeing. We're looking kind of into the top of the potato, and scale it down so that it matches about the same width. I'm going to hold down Control so my snapping is temporarily disabled, and rotate from right here, and then scale that up. Scale that up a little bit. So now it's about the same width. But the perspective is a little off. I'd like this to match more with my slice rather than making the actual potato fit the shape of this. And that's actually really easy to do in Photoshop. All I have to do is hit Command T to transform it, and then right click and say distort. And what this allows me to do is grab any of these handles individually and warp this however I want. So when I grab this bottom corner, you can see that I'm basically just shifting the perspective and getting this to fit however I need it to. So I'm basically just going to line up those corners there and shift that perspective a little bit more until it lines up with that cut. Something about like that. And there we go. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger because it is pretty hard to see right now as it is. So I'm just going to drag a selection around there, make sure I don't have my katana, and then make this nice and big. That way I have more detail in here and I can see what's going on. So I'm concerned with just this layer here and making it look as convincingly like it was actually a sliced potato as possible. Now what I'm noticing is that the potato peel right here is coming inwards. And what that's telling me is that because I flipped this around, the perspective is just off a little bit. So what I think I need to do is, instead of showing the inside of the top of the potato, I need to show the inside of the bottom part of the potato. And this will probably just make a little more sense if I just do it. So let me undo back to before I distorted that slice at all, and then scale this all up one more time. So grab all my potatoes, layers, scale it up nice and big, and then I need to change this path on the top so that it's curved downwards instead of upwards. And I might make this even a little bit more rounded on the edges. And then pull it up. I don't want so much of that top to be left after that first slice. Something like this. Okay, so there's the sliced top, and then the bottom needs to curve down in the same way. So I'm going to grab that vector mask, and I'm actually just going to invert this. So it's combining, not subtracting. And maybe at this point 2 or 3 slices have already been chopped off, so a little bit more of the potato would be gone. Maybe about that much. And line this up fairly nicely, something like this. And now you can see that I'm missing that inside portion of the potato. And what I was talking about with the perspective is because of the shape of that potato peel, it looks like it's going to more naturally fit the this perspective. So from here, I can now distort it, go into the warp, or sorry, not warp, but distort, and then shift this perspective around. And I think this is going to look a little bit more natural. So I'm not too worried about matching my curve exactly. I'm more worried about making the distortion of this layer look natural. So maybe the slice looks something like this. You can see how I can very easily just shift that perspective and get that to fit nicely on top of my potato. Maybe just scale it down in a little bit so that edge lines up nice. Same thing on this side. And now all that's left is getting that potato peel to blend in a little bit better. And I can worry about that in just a little bit. It's probably just going to be some curves adjustments. But now that I have that base portion of the potato, I can take these other 2 layers and kind of align them where I think they might fit. So somewhere around here. And if we look at the storyboard, they're kind of just sliced and floating in midair. So I'm just going to basically rotate them a little bit, make it look like they're separating out from each other. and maybe just play with that distortion a little bit to shift that perspective and fit the bottom portion a little bit better. Something like that, and then we have the top up here. So there's a pretty sizable gap between the top where it's been cut and the next slice. So maybe what I want to do is just scale this down a little bit and then maybe add another slice in here. So I'm just going to duplicate this one that's been distorted and call it potato slice 4. Here we go. And then just reshape it to fit the way that I need to. So first I'm just going to kind of undistort it as much as I have. Get it to match the perspective of the other ones a little bit, and then just scale it down. So Command T to transform and get it about the same size as the width of that top, and bring the top to the very top of this stack. There we go. Now we've got a slice that's about the same size as that top, and it actually looks like it might be rotated and distorted this direction. Let me just mess with this a little bit more to get that looking about right. I want that part of the peel that we see the most to be in the front. And then get that lined up nicely. Looks good. Drop it down and then maybe just skew it down just a little bit more, like that. There we go. Now I've got my 1, 2, 3 slices, the top flying off, and then the base. Let me grab all of these, scale them down, and then position them somewhere over here, and then play around with the placement of the actual slices. So maybe I'll grab the bottom and that first potato slice and rotate it this direction a little bit more, kind of give it all like an arc, and then have these ones further off. Okay, cool. I like the way that looks. I just want to adjust the edge of this potato peel right here a little bit. And this might be something that I can adjust with curves. So I'm just going to grab a curves first, Command M, and then just see if I can brighten up the darks a little bit and maybe pull down those brights so that I'm not overexposing the actual potato section in here. And I'm just matching that peel a little bit better. Something like that. Now it still has a little bit of an edge there, but it all feels a little bit more seamless. I could also just, add a layer mask, Command click on the layer thumbnail to make a selection, mask it off, and then switch to my brush tool. Make sure that it's fairly hard. I don't want it to be super soft. And then just brush out a little bit of this peel. That way it blends in a little bit more. There we go. Now those two are combined. I'll group those two and call it potato bottom. And there we go. Now I've got my sliced up potato floating in the air, freshly chopped from that katana. And I could play around with this placement a lot, but something like that arrangement is pretty good. I like the way that looks. Now I just want to play with the placement between the actual potatoes and the katana. I think the potato is a little bit big, so maybe I'll scale that down even a little further. I'm just kind of comparing that to the size of the person's hands. That would be a really big potato, but you know what? This is another one of those situations where this is very playful. It's not supposed to be ultra realistic, so maybe I do exaggerate the size of the potato a little bit just to serve my composition a little bit better. So something that's a little bit exaggerated is okay with me. And then maybe I'll curve this out a little bit. This could be a frame that might benefit from the rule of thirds. So I'm going to do another guide layout, 3x3. Maybe angle this katana down a little bit further and even scale it up so it's taking up more of the frame. I could align these hands around this cross mark on the thirds, and then have this blade also lining up with the thirds somewhere around here. Something like that, and then maybe you just scale it down a little. And on the storyboard, they had these lines coming off the sword, kind of indicating the direction of the motion. That might be something I play around with in Illustrator to try and bring some life to the motion here, some indicators, and just some stylizing to the overall design, something that just makes it feel a little bit more unique. I think I'm going to call that good on that board for now. Next frame I need to do is probably this one right here with the type. So it's sliced up the potato and it's falling on the plate with the text, "It can handle potatoes." So let's add another artboard. There we go. I'll bring over this green layer I'll bring over the green background, and we're going to need a plate and potato slices on the plate. So let's again look at our stock and see what we have. Probably this one right here. I've already used part of this potato, but including this little garnish on the outside, it can make it look like it was, intended to be plated and presented. So I kind of like that. So we'll start by just isolating that photo from the background. This should be pretty easy to do with just the magic wand. If I select the background and then invert my selection, then I can just clean up some of this. So with my quick selection, I'll subtract some of this white and just isolate everything from the background. All right, there we go. We've got the hands holding the plate with the potatoes on top with the little garnishing. Looks pretty convincing, like it's actually there, I think. And this frame also needs the text, "It can handle potatoes." So this is probably going to live somewhere up here, maybe a little bit smaller. And then I need to put some text in. Now, the storyboard is rough. Again, I can choose how I want to do this type, but I kind of like the layout that was sketched out. So I think I'm going to try at least starting there. Let me add some guides into this. Maybe align the plate there nice and centered, and then also right on that third. So the third line is crossing into those potatoes. And then down here is where I'll put my type. So I need to type out, "It can handle potatoes." So it can handle potatoes. And I'm just going to make it white for now. Make it nice and big. And then choose a font. Now, what I've been thinking for the style of this piece all along is kind of old kung fu movies, ninja movies, karate, that probably showed up in the 70s and the early 80s. So I'm trying to think of a font that might fit that style pretty well. I think I want to use something big and bold, probably a sans serif. So why don't we just start by looking at those fonts. Limit myself to Typekit for now, and I'll go to sans serif, and then just start looking through these. Now, I'm just going to pick one really quickly and make it all caps. I just have a feeling I'm going to want this to be a big, solid block of text. So I'm just going to go ahead and just make that all caps, and then start looking through these fonts. This one I like. It's super wide, which probably will lend itself to this wide frame and the space that I have access to. So I'm going to drop potatoes down to the second line just like it was written here, and then maybe just look at the weights. So we've got a lot of different weights. Let's just see what black looks like. That's super big and bold. Let me take potatoes off of this layer and just make its own so that I can style this however I need to. But let's just play with the weights again. Maybe I'll make potatoes nice and big. I'll just go to Ultra, the biggest size. Yeah, nice and fat. Finding fonts does not always go this quickly, obviously, but I just instantly loved the way that this one looks, how wide it is and how I have the different weights that are super fat. I think it pretty much exactly fits that style of the 70s, 80s B kung fu movies. So I think that's actually going to work out just like it is. So maybe I'll play with that little rule of thumb where I take the thickest weight and then drop this text down 2 versions, just so there's a little bit of contrast between these 2 lines, and then just make sure that's nice and lined up on the edges. And just give it a little bit more breathing room, but I think that looks pretty great. I'm not going to worry about any kind of kerning or anything right now. I do see there are some issues with this text, but I can get to that a little later on in the phase of this design process. I think this is working out fairly well, though. It's taking up a lot of space, but I kind of like it. So I'm gonna just move this up a little bit, group that together, and call it plate. And then this is my typography. And then just look at my guides and maybe drop or pop that one up a little bit so that top line is resting there on the thirds. Okay, cool. That is a good start to that frame, I think. So I'm just going to leave it as it is and move on to the next frame. So let's take a look at what that is. the transition frame, right? Okay, so this is going to need a katana slicing through the previous board. So let's look at what we have access to again. One of these two right here. So we've got the businessman holding it, and then this other woman. I really love the perspective of this one. I think it's going to work better. The camera was closer to the blade. It's in focus. This one looks like it's a little bit of out of focus at the tip. So I'm going to go with that one. So let's grab that one, pull it into Photoshop, and cut it out. This, by the way, is how you can tell it's a prop sword, because the edge is not actually sharp at all. That is very blunt. It's not going to cut through anything. So what I'm actually going to do is get rid of that thick edge. I'm just going to kind of cheat this mask so that you don't see any of this dark, flat, blunt edge. I'm going to just trim it off so it looks much thinner and sharper than it actually is. And then further down the sword here, where it does have a darker side to the edge, I'm going to just kind of curve my path into that so that it includes it eventually. And this portion that's super blurred out here, I'm probably never even going to see it, so I'm not too concerned with how precise these paths actually are. All right, so now I just need to play around with the positioning of this and how much of the actual blade is going to be visible. In the storyboard, we just see that blade sticking through, coming towards the camera, right around the center of the frame. Let me get some guides in here. Somewhere around there, probably. And then I'm going to need to split this plate in half, and really the entire frame in half. So the background's going to have a different color coming through. And all we're really seeing of this sword is about probably this much of it. So I guess first I need to decide what the angle of the slice is going to look like so I can know where to split everything else. So why don't we just have it come down the center? This is kind of going out in a V shape, but I think I'm going to make it more like it's coming from an angle. So the top, or the left side of the slice is probably going to be more in the center, somewhere around there. It's going to need to come down to the base of the sword. And then I'm just going to have it like slice out this direction. So I need a color that is this shape. So I'm going to make a new solid color using that path, and then I don't know what color we're going to use yet, but somewhere, bright, and then change this to combine. So that's basically what it's going to look like going into the background. So we're revealing that through this transition. Now, I think this is going to need to go down probably further so we can see more of that katana blade, and it's sticking out a little bit more there. Something like that maybe. And I want to line that up with the bottom edge of the blade. And then I want to cut off everything from there over on the rest of this, this blade. So I'm going to just kind of match that angle. Something close. And then take off this portion of it. So with my katana selected, add that vector mask and make sure that lines up perfectly there. And then change it to subtract. I want to make sure that's nice and clean. I don't want to see any of that purple behind it. So I might just cheat it out a little bit. There we go. That looks like it's slicing through there now. Let me get rid of my panels and just look at this as a whole. I really think I need to see more of the katana blade there. So what I'm going to do is unlink my vector mask, make sure I'm selected on just the layer, and then I can reposition this however I need to. The mask is staying where it is, and then I'm just repositioning more of the blade to be outside here. Maybe I'll just scale it down so it looks like it's a little bit longer. Something like that. I think that fits a little bit better. And then obviously I need to split this plate in half. So I'm going to need 2 copies of this group. Maybe first what I'll do is just mask it off in this shape. So about here. And actually I'm going to need that to line up right at that exact spot. So right about there. Because that's the portion of the plate that's going to rotate off. So with that, I'm going to add my vector mask to it. So we'll call this plate left and then duplicate it. Call it plate right. And then invert that mask. and rotate that group a little bit. I'm going to leave the mask where it is, I think. Deselect the path and then move my anchor point right here and rotate from that position. So actually, you know what? What's probably going to make this easier to line up is just aligning this mask exactly with that left edge of the path. And that way I can rotate the mask with it. Now that that's lined up, I can link this up again and then transform the plate and the mask. And I'll know that I've gone far enough once I start to see inside there. So right about there. I'm just going to rotate it out about that far. But that way I know that this part of the potato would be lined up with this part of the potato, and it's just shifted out a little bit. Then I just want to make sure this path is nice and clean so we're not losing anything there. We're not seeing through that green background. Something like that. Cover up all those transparent pixels, and then also it looks like the plate is misaligned a little bit down here, so maybe what I'll do is just cut off a little bit more of that plate and drop it down just a pixel. There we go. Make sure that we're not getting any pixels over here that we shouldn't be. Bring that mask out. There we go. That looks pretty good. And that is definitely being sliced out of the picture there. I think that'll work. Now this purple color I pretty much just randomly chose. I probably want to change that. Maybe we'll go back to the yellow. So we start in the yellow, go to this intense red, to the green showing off the product, and then we slice through and get back to the yellow where the katana is going to be chopping up the carrots. That might work well with the carrot color. So let me just change this back to yellow. There we go. And then I can make my next board, which would be down here. Make sure that goes to the top. And then copy over the yellow, not the green. The yellow background. There we go. And I'm probably going to just go straight into that carrot chopping, right? Yep, from the transition into chopping up the vegetables with cut your veggies in style, that text. So I'm going to need some text in this frame as well. So I'll just copy these two layers, or actually the typography folder over there, and change this to say cut your veggies in style. So cut your veggies in style, and then kind of just lock this up the same way that I did with the other text. Cut your veggies in style. And that's probably going to need to be a lot smaller, but something like that. Probably not going to leave this solid white. I don't like the way that it's contrasting with the background right now, and it's really hard to read on the yellow. So I'm going to make that black for now. But I will come back to that a little bit later. All right, so what do we need on this frame? We need the katana, we need carrots, and we need the cutting board. And the carrot needs to be sliced up. So what do we have access to in our stock photos? We've got an empty cutting board, we've got a carrot as a whole, and some carrot slices. So those are the three images I'm gonna need. I'll open those up in Photoshop and start cutting them out. Now, just like the potatoes, I'm going to need to show the inside of the carrot. So I'm going to take this carrot slice and use the surface of it to kind of mask that part of the carrot that I'm going to have to cut out to give me something that isn't actually there. And then I'll probably use these slices, or at least this front slice, also as something that's laying on the cutting board there. Now this slice was actually a part of a peeled carrot, so I don't want the outside, I just want the inside, the center portion right there, so that that's all that we see. Then all I have to do is take the portion that intersects with the widest portions of the slice and cut off everything below it. So if I just do this, add a mask there onto my carrot, that adds instead of subtracts. It seems like it's always doing the opposite of what I'm trying to do. There we go. Looks like a carrot's been sliced in half. I think that's actually really convincing, and it doesn't really need anything else. So there we go. Now with the layout of this frame, the katana, it looks like from the transition, is going straight into the carrot. So the katana is going to be coming in this direction. So that means I'm going to need to swap the orientation of my carrot. So let me group that and then just flip this horizontally. And that way it's coming, the blade's going to be aligned with that slice a little bit better. And I'll move the cutting board and the carrot over together somewhere around here. I'm thinking the sword is going to come in over this direction. So there's that. Maybe move this over a little bit. And then I need my katana. Now, there was one katana over here that I had not used yet, if I remember right. Sure enough, right there. Yep, right there. So I'm going to grab that one and just see if that's going to work for me. So I'm going to collapse all these and move this up above the carrot and see if I can get this to work. I'm just going to flip this vertically and then rotate it and see if this works. I don't think this one is going to work because it was taken at an angle that's pretty much straight on the side. And if I remember right, in here we have the business suit samurai that I have not used yet. That's more of the perspective that was originally drawn in this storyboard. So I think I better just use this last photo that I have access to and cut out the hands with the katana and use this one instead. So let's do that quickly. Yeah, I think this is going to work a lot better. Just the entire, the way that the model was holding the katana and the direction of the blade. So now it's just basically a matter of picking where I want the hands to be and then aligning the blade to the carrot. So I think I want the hands to be somewhere around here on that third, kind of balancing out the text. Maybe this text could be moved up a little bit so that in style, the top of in style is aligned to that thirds guide. And then these hands could be over here on this thirds. And I think I'm happy with the hands there, so I'm going to move my anchor point to that spot and then Option Shift scale down from that point and align the blade. That way I can choose the scale without having to reposition the hands every time. So something like that would probably work. And maybe I'll raise this up off the carrot so it's one of the up swings instead of down. So you can clearly see that carrot being chopped. And to sell that even a little bit more, let's move the carrot tip away just a little bit. And you know what? Maybe I'll put an extra one of these slices in there too. So I'm going to duplicate that, get rid of this vector mask, and then just space this out, making sure the tip goes on the top. But there we go. Now we've got a slice of the carrot, and it's just sitting there, maybe leaning up against the tip, and it adds a little bit more depth to that. All right, I think that's good. Okay, next up, let's look at the storyboard. I think all that's left is this end card. So that was given to me. So let's make another artboard over here and place embedded. Find that end card right there under the branding folder. We got the logo and the URL. I'll place that in, and the bounding box is not staying contained to the object. I don't know why, but when I place it, it snaps there. So then I can just align it to the center. Now I might want to play around with the alignment of that a little bit above or below that halfway point. I'm probably going to need to bring out some guides to get that to snap to the middle so I can see right where the actual center is. And that's sitting just a little bit above the halfway point, the logo is, but you know what? It feels pretty balanced because of the logo or the URL down at the bottom. So for now, at least, I'm going to leave it just like it is. I think that's fine. And let's pick a background color, probably something that's unique. We've got the yellow, the red, the green. Let's find another bright color in here. So I'll add a new solid. And so we've done yellow, green, red, maybe a purple, a bluish purple, not pure blue, but maybe a purple here. Click OK and move that down below the end card. And this being black on top of that doesn't really work. So maybe I'll make this white instead. So just add a color overlay, make sure it's white, click OK, and there we go. It's a little bit easier to look at now. And maybe I'll just play with that purple a little bit. Take out a little bit of the saturation, make it not quite so intense. Somewhere around there maybe. And see how that looks with the rest of the colors. I think that's pretty good. All right, and that's really all that goes on that frame, right? We see the logo and then the background, and we hear the line Ninja Gear because why should ninjas have all the fun? So I just need to add one more board here, and this is going to have the same contents as what's over in this artboard, so I'll duplicate that over, and I need to put in some knives. So let's open those up in Photoshop and cut them out. Surprisingly, this is really giving me a lot of trouble on these knives with the reflective edge and the white background. I expected it to be really easy to cut out with the Magic Wand tool, but it's not. So I'm just going to quickly use the pen tool to make part of this selection a little bit more cleanly. Now, something very interesting with certain stock photos is that the photographer has actually isolated the subject already. It's on a pure white background. This isn't actually the background it was shot on. And if you're very lucky and you got a photographer who's very thoughtful, you can actually embed paths, vector paths, in a JPEG. So check the paths folder, and sure enough, in this particular knife, there is a vector path that I can make a selection of and then apply to my layer. No extra work necessary. Just like that, my photo has been masked off. Easy as that. All right, so here are my 3 cutouts of the knives, and now I can just place them. So the storyboard kind of has the butcher knife coming in from the right side going into the left, and then we've got 1, 2 on top on either side. So why don't I just stick to that same composition and see how it looks. So this one is probably going to be somewhere around here, and I'm probably going to have to distort the perspective on that, but I'll get to that in a second. Then maybe we stick another one in here and flip this one around and put this one up in the top right, like that. All right, now let's play with the perspective a little. I want to make all these look like they're kind of at an angle and not so flat. So I'm going to transform this, Command T, and then go to perspective. And this allows me to grab one handle and kind of symmetrically scale the opposite handle to kind of adjust the perspective more easily. Now I can't grab this and bring it in. That's what I want to do though. So I'm going to switch back to my regular transform just by hitting Command T. Then I can grab that and scale it down a little bit. I don't want to do this too much. I don't want to make this look super fake, but just playing with the perspective a little bit like that I think is going to work. Something like that. And I'll grab this knife here and do pretty much the same thing. Adjust the perspective so the handle's bigger and the tip is a little smaller. And then just take that distortion down a little bit by bringing this down in like that. And I can play around with the sizing too. I don't have to keep them all exactly the same size they were. There we go. I think those angles are a little bit better now. And now I just want to make it look like they're actually in that background, so I'm going to take off the tips of each one of these. So I'll probably just make a path like this and make sure to add that as a mask and invert it. Then I can play with the alignment. We want it to be more like that. Do the same thing on the others. Then I think I'm going to rotate this knife around a little bit so it's not covering up so much of that logo. Maybe right around there. There we go. Now that looks like those are nice and tucked into the background there. And with that, I think I've finished the last little bit of composition for these 9 boards. I've cut out all the photos and I've got the elements laid out where they need to be. So let's just look at everything as a whole real quick. We've got the katana coming out of the sheath from frame 1 to 2. We've got the bullet being split with this 3D render. The katana slicing up the potato slices on the plate with the text. Then the transitional frame with the katana slicing through it. Going into our next frame of Cut Your Veggies in Style. Ninja Gear logo. Knives being thrown into that same frame. So all of the main elements are there. All of the photo elements are there, and the compositions are pretty much set. I'm even really happy with the way that the colors turned out. I think that gives off the vibe that I wanted for this piece. What I'm not happy with yet is the way that this text is being treated. I'm just not happy with this pure white text. But an idea I had was to try something that I wouldn't normally, which is make it outlined. Instead of having a fill, just make an outline. So what I'm going to do is take this group folder, turn the fill opacity all the way off so it basically disappears. Then double click on the typography group to bring up the layer styles for that group and add a stroke to it. So we can see what that looks like. I'll zoom in 100% so we can see just how thick that line is. And that might be a little bit too thin, so I'm just going to bump it up to maybe 2. And right now the position is on the inside, so if I scale this way up, you can see that it's coming into the text. I could also change this to being the center or the outside. And I think the outside is where I want it to be. So maybe I'll put it right around 2 or 3 points or pixels for the stroke width. Click OK and see what that looks like. I actually really like that. It's like I said, not something I would normally do, but this is kind of a, campy throwback style to the 70s and the 80s, so I think it actually kind of fits. One thing I might try is making it not pure black, just bringing it up on the gray just a little bit so it's not pure black. Like that maybe. And then apply that same style to the other layers. So I'm going to copy the layer style of this group. That will copy the stroke as well as the fill. And then I can just paste that on top of the other typography folders. So paste layer style. There we go. And I'll do the same thing to this one. Select that text, find that group, and paste the layer style. All right, let's take a look at these as a whole. So one thing that's still bothering me about this text is because I position that stroke on the outside, it actually is filling in these gaps that are really tight on the E's and even the S's. So maybe putting it on the center or the inside actually would have been a better idea. Let me try that and see what it looks like. From the outside to the inside, that definitely opens up the gaps, but it's pushing in on that inside fill basically, and I'm not really a fan of that. So why don't we try center and just see how that looks on everything else. To bring up all the strokes at once, I'm just going to search for a effect and then select stroke. And there we go. I can see all my strokes at once. I'll grab this one and change that to the inside. Or sorry, not inside, but the center. And then go to the last one right here. And yeah, this one definitely, you can see all those gaps getting filled in. If I change this to center, that might work a little bit better. Okay, I like that. Maybe this text should be a little bit bigger just because those lines are still kind of running into each other. So maybe I'll make this bigger and fit it in to these elements a little bit nicer. But there we go. We're still lining it up with that thirds section right there. I think it is all nice and balanced the way that the katana kind of leads your eye around this frame. It's going down, you look at the text and just keep going around here. I think that's working really well. But some of the typography could use some massaging, like right here. I just want to make that gap a little bit bigger. So there's a clear, distinct gap between the L and the E. Make sure that the gaps between the Y on either side are consistent. That S and T are real close. And then yeah, some of this up here needs some help just to make it a little bit more consistent. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe now I'll just scale that line up a tad so it lines up with the bottom line. All right, now let's take a look at this text and see if it needs any adjustments. Definitely right here. Maybe a little bit here. The top line looks pretty good, so now I'll just scale this down just a tad so that it matches that width of the E there. Oh, and the P is not lining up with the I, so let me actually align that first and then bring that S in. There we go. Now it's nice and clean, boxed off around there. It's a block of text, and I just want to copy that over to the other artboard. So what I'll do is just delete this typography group and duplicate this one over. There we go. Okay, with that, I think I'm at a good stopping point. I've laid out my compositions, I've got my typography working, I've chosen colors. What's left is to add an actual graphical style to all of these elements. All of these photo assets are pretty much as is, as they were shot, and I need to make adjustments to them, not only to balance the brightness and color values of everything, but also just giving it a look, something that actually feels like it's designed and has something to it, instead of just these cut out photos slapped on top of solid colored backgrounds. I also probably want to add in some 2D accents, maybe something going on here with the bullet splitting, like it's a little spark or something. I could add some shimmer on the blade here, like the light's hitting it, and it's kind of like a lens flare reflecting off the blade. And then maybe I'll borrow this idea of these speed lines coming off of the knives and the katana moving around to kind of imply some motion and just give a little bit of a graphical element that can be later on animated to kind of just add to that motion. But I'm going to stop here for now, and we'll pick up on the rest of those elements in the next lesson.